Hi, readers, it's Lori, and today we're going to go over the books that I read in the month of June of 2025. It was a fairly good reading month for me, and I'm really happy to say that I got a lot of reading done, and it may have caused me to have paused a little the first little bit of July because it was a lot. So let's get started. The month of June, I read 6 books, which I'm really happy about, especially given the length of 2 of them. And that was 2,025 pages worth. And my average time to finish was 11 days. But I'm going to say that that's not necessarily accurate because, to be honest, I don't always add the books that I'm reading to Storygraph as soon as I start reading them. I do usually mark them read when I finish because I like to make sure that that happens within the month. And one of them was I was on the end of the month day when I finished it. But I don't think that 11 days is necessarily accurate, but that doesn't really matter to me. But I'm going to tell you, or maybe from now on, I'm not going to tell you how many average days because it's not really true. The moods were all over the place this month. So I would say that my highest level of mood was mysterious, followed by tense, funny, dark, lighthearted, and adventurous. So it was really a good mix of all of those things, but predominantly mysterious, tense, and funny. So you'll know why in a minute. My pace was medium, which it usually is, but 67% of the books I read were medium. So page numbers, most of the books I read were 300 or less pages, and the other higher stat for this category is 500 plus, because I read 2 books this month that were over 500 pages long. So that was 33% of what I read. And then between 300 and 499 was 17%. So I read some pretty hefty books this month, and I'm happy about that. I also read some nonfiction this month. Finally, I finished the nonfiction pick for the second quarter. So I was happy about that. So that was 17% of my whole pie, which essentially was mostly fiction, as you probably already guessed. The top 2 categories of genre in my reading this month were mystery, thriller and crime, followed by short stories, which is interesting, and science fiction, mystery, horror, historical, and autobiography. We'll talk about why these were interesting in a minute. Also, what's interesting is it says that I read 100% of these in print form. So that's a mistake on my part because one of these was completely audio and one of them was partially audio. But again, it's really hard to be able to do those partial choices. Otherwise, it looks like you read 2 books instead of 1. But I definitely must not have added the version of one of them that I meant to because it was totally listened to on Libro.fm. So here's where the rating system really is a good thing for me because it reminds me of what I felt when I was reading some of these. So my average rating this month was 3.88, which is interesting because I thought it would be higher. But I think what happened was I was thinking about the size of the book and not how it correlated with the rest of them. One book was 3 stars, one book was 3.5 stars, one book was 3.75 stars, and then 2 books were 4 stars, and one was a 5-star. So that was how I ended up. Now, I really feel okay about all of that. It is interesting that it worked out that way. And so for me, the peak times of reading the pages that I read were the 8th of the month, the 14th, 15th time of the month, and then the 25th of the month, but also the 30th of the month. So again, I finished one on the very last day that I had to be able to read it, and so I'm okay with that. So let's talk about what they are. Let me get my glasses on. The first book I read was an audiobook as well, and it doesn't show up as that on Storygraph now that I'm mentioning that to you. I borrowed this on Hoopla. This is called A Body in 3B, and it's written by Erin Scott. Her name is spelled Eryn, which I really liked. I don't know that I've ever seen that before. And this was a murder at the Morrissey book one in a series that I will probably continue reading. This was a cozy, so it felt like something that was good for me to begin the month with. And I read it pretty quickly. I listened to it in 4 days and completed it. What helped for me was my kids were out of town. And so I was going back and forth to feed the dogs. I may have told you this before when I was talking about it, and I was able to listen to it on both trips there and back. So it worked out really, really well for me. This one is set in Seattle, which is nice because I don't read a lot of books set in Seattle, and I do some work with people in Seattle. So I love that state and city for sure. But this one is about a girl whose name is Meg Dawson. She had an aunt who lived at the Morrissey before, and that aunt had moved away. So the apartment or condo, I think it was a condo, was available. And Meg moved back to Seattle because of some things in her career and her life that were just not working for her. And so she moves back to Seattle a little bit adrift. But the nice thing is that a lot of people who live at the Morrissey are people that she knows and grew up knowing, so she feels pretty safe and, connected to some of these people. But she realizes that someone in the Morrissey has been murdered. And as I remember, she didn't really know this person well. What he was a reclusive guy, and so he didn't go out of his apartment a lot. He didn't participate in different events that these people in the condo have. They have like a little HOA, and they get together for parties and things on the rooftop. And so they're a very eclectic but also connected group of residents in this Morrissey building. And she ends up finding someone who lives there that she had known and grew up with, and she kind of has a little bit of a crush on him. They're both kind of connected to this guy getting murdered, which is interesting. Then, of course, she and some other people begin to try to figure out what happened and who killed this person, this odd guy. Meg also has a ghosty friend named Ripley, and Ripley has been with her since she passed. Ripley was a friend of her mom's, and her mom has also passed, I think. And so she just has this aunt, and really is kind of being parented by the aunt, but also by the ghost to some degree. So there are ghosts in this. There are funny characters in this. There are amusing situations, and it was pretty easy to read. I only gave this one 3 stars, however. I think that at times it was a little slow for me, and then at times it just, I don't know, it just felt like it was a little disjointed here and there, and we were going this direction and that direction, and the whole point of this other guy being in the story didn't end up the way that I guess I thought it would. Like, that was just sort of, not that he wasn't, I guess, an important character, but in the end, he really wasn't an important character. But I'm sure that this will continue because this is a series and it will go on to book 2, which I started to read and then I didn't get farther in that. So I don't know if I will go back to that. I think so, though. I really do. So there's The Secret Staircase, which is the second one in this series. Then there is A Poisoned Package, which is number 3. And I think that might be it. She's written a lot of other mysteries as well. Oh no, there's a number 4. A Crime in 5C is number 4. I don't like this in Goodreads when they don't put them together, so you have to keep looking down this list and find them because all the other ones are peppered in there. A Bullet in the Basement is number 5. That one came out this year, so I'm going to assume that that's maybe the last one, but there might be one that's coming out again. If you're interested in a cozy that's set in Seattle in a condo with a bunch of fairly likable people, this might be a read for you. And they're quick, easy, and like I said, I mean, I enjoyed it. 3 stars is a good rating. I just didn't necessarily love it. Then after that, I was reading voraciously this. Now, I've done a whole standalone on this, and I do not want to keep repeating myself about it, but this one was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. Everyone who read it and commented or talked to me during the period of time I was reading this said they loved it. I read this in a combination of ebook as well as physical book, and you can see that this is one that would knock you out if you were to drop it, on your head while you were trying to read it. I really enjoyed it. I love Stephen King's books for the most part, and this one may be my favorite of his of all time. I will say that this is not horror. This is historical fiction. This is time travel. This is very detailed. It is very well developed. The characters in this book will stay in my mind for a long time. I probably will reread this at some point in my lifetime, as many of you have said that you did. It just really, really is good. And because it's about this, it really just is the icing on the cake for me because I'm really interested in everything that revolves around JFK. What was interesting about it, and I may have said this, so my apologies if I did, was that we were in Boston when I started this book, and I was able to go to the JFK Presidential Library, and I enjoy those presidential library visits very, very much. And this one was incredible. It was just, there were so many things there that I loved to see, so many things that I hadn't seen, so many things I knew about, so many things I didn't know about. So if you ever get a chance to go and see that, I highly recommend it. I highly recommend going to any presidential library. They're just all a really lovely experience because you get to know things that, at least in my part, you didn't really know, especially about presidents that came when you were very, very little. So, there's that, but really, really good. Really enjoyed that trip and really enjoyed that book. I read Dearest by Jackie Walters, which was my book of the month selection for the month of June. I'm trying to read one book of the month club book at least a month, and so this was the one that I picked. I did a try a chapter, if you remember, and this was the one that I felt like would really be, kind of carrying me through, and it did. It was a fast read for me, Dearest. This is horror, and I'm going to tell you this is really horror-y. And it was very, very graphic horror. And so I think that if you are a horror lover, this one is great. It's also about a woman and a young child, still breastfeeding, still taking care of this child. And her husband is military and he's out of town. Her name is Flora, and her baby girl's name is Iris. And Iris also came early. So I think, as I remember, her husband had not met Iris yet, or maybe he had, but he had to leave as soon as she was born. It's a great premise, and it's very revealed in the synopsis, so I'm not telling you anything differently, but she's experiencing this postpartum fog, and those of us who have had children can probably relate to that. It's very overwhelming to have a child, especially when you're taking care of said child by yourself. I can tell you that that is not the way to go, but it sometimes happens, right? The things that are happening to her is essentially just that she's very, very forgetful, which again is a kind of a byproduct of having a baby. And her mother comes to help her, which is very surprising to Flora because she and her mother have been estranged for a long, long time. And her mother shows up to be able to try to help her. I don't want you to know anything else about this because I think that it's better that you don't know. The only thing I want you to know is that there's a lot of body horror and there's a lot of, there's some things that are kind of hard to digest, but it all ends up making sense in the end, and I am glad that I read it. And I would recommend that one to people, especially if you have a stomach for it. But again, you have to have a stomach for it. And I gave Dearest a 3.5. So it rounded up on Goodreads to 4, but it was a 3.5 star read for me. So the next one is Our Last Resort by Clémence Michel. I think it's Michelin, but I'm not sure. I think Clémence is a French author, but I didn't look that up. This came out or comes out on July 8th, so this is an arc for me. I actually read it in plenty of time, so I was happy about that. That doesn't always happen. And I was pleased that NetGalley sent this to me to be able to read and to review for you because I would not have necessarily found this one or maybe even picked this one up if it hadn't been an arc, I think, and I really enjoyed it. This is about two young people, Frida and her brother Gabriel, which is a complex relationship to some degree, partly because of the fact that they were raised in a cult. So it has two timelines, the cult timeline and the present day timeline. So the cult has a lot of, that actually is it could be difficult for people who've ever been in that kind of an experience. So that's a sensitivity warning that I'll put out there. Some things happened. They were there when they were very young, and then I think they were there to like teens or young adult kind of status, and then something happens and they are no longer at the cult. Now, since they have kind of grown up and they are adults, they're living in different places. They don't see each other as often, so they take this trip on this vacation to a very posh resort so that they can spend some time together and just get away from work. They both have jobs that, that are different, but they work pretty hard. And they've always kind of worked pretty hard ever since they left the cult because they've had to fend for themselves, so to speak. So while they are at this resort, you are noticing at first like how this is going and what they're doing and the people that they're meeting and those kinds of things. And then someone at the resort is murdered, and so the police are looking at all suspects. Let me tell you what I said about this. I liked the characters. They were very well developed, and even the side characters were developed enough for you to feel like you were connected to them, but they weren't as relevant really as the story of Frida and Gabriel. That was really the center of this whole thing. The switch between the timelines wasn't disruptive for me, which sometimes it can be, but in this case, it stayed, to a point where I could really understand. And it was very clear when they went back and forth and where they were and those kinds of things. So I'm noticing those dual timelines don't always work for me, but in this case, they really did. They also were pretty evenly paced throughout. I did anticipate some of what ended up happening, but it didn't ruin the book for me at all. So I feel like you might kind of figure out what goes on, but maybe not. And it took me about 2 weeks to read this one, which work wise and everything else going on in my life, that's pretty normal for me, I would say. And she also wrote The Quiet Tenant, which is a book that I have heard of and didn't read. So I might end up reading something else by this author. And I gave Our Last Resort 3.75 stars, so not quite a 4, but really well done. Again, I'm glad that I read it. All right, the next one I read is An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good by Helene Tursten. This is translated from the Swedish, which I'm really excited about because my family on my mother's side is Swedish, and so I felt really good about that. And it's translated by Marlene Delargy. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that is what it is. And I gave this one 4 stars. This one was a surprise to me for a couple of reasons. I didn't know a whole lot about it, but someone, and I really can't remember who it was, it may have been one of you, recommended this book, and so I got it on Libro.fm. This is the one that I listened to from start to finish, and so it just doesn't show up that way because of my error in putting it in there properly. I could go back and fix that, I'm sure. But this one I read pretty easily, pretty quickly. Goodreads, it says I started it on the 27th and I finished it on the 27th. That's not true. I just didn't write down when I actually really did start it. But I was surprised by this book for a couple of reasons. It was also a bit violent, and I guess I just didn't think that that's what was going to happen. It was also short stories, so the chapters were each a story, and they still carried on with the same character, but they each had a different sort of start and end. I really enjoyed that. And this was the first short story novel I've read in a really long time. So that is why I was like, oh, this was exciting. It was unexpected exciting. So Maud is her name, and she's billed as an irascible 88-year-old woman. So obviously she's curmudgeony. She's not necessarily honest all the time. And she ends up with these different situations that occur, much like the body in 3B, that occur in ways in which they present other people that live in this community, this building where she lives. And so she's 88, but she's very sharp. She's very capable of taking care of herself. But sometimes she kind of feigns a little bit of, you know, dementia, or she feigns a little bit of like simpleton kind of thoughts and ideas, and oh, I maybe need help, and those kinds of things. So it makes her a very well developed, but also curious character. And as you're reading it, at least for me, the things that she ends up doing were a surprise to me. I guess I just didn't really, and I didn't read the synopsis, so I'm trying actually not to read some of the synopses lately because they just give away too much. So I really, in this case, just listened to it and just took it in that way. But I really loved it. She does love to travel. She does love to collect things. Her place where she lives, she doesn't pay rent. There's a little bit of contention based on that from some of the people that live in the building with her, but she was gifted this, I think, by the ancestors in her family. So she just does, it's paid off, I guess, essentially. There is a crime that happens in this book. I will say that. So it is sort of a crime mystery. Um, I wouldn't say thriller. It's a little cozy at times, so it's kind of hard to define, I would say. But it was really, I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad that I got it. I think people would enjoy it, and yeah, I recommend it. It was well written, it was well paced, it was well developed. It was surprising at times, and it was funny. So there you go. If that's what you're looking for, funny is it. And then the other one that was fairly funny, but also was a big book summer pick that I did get done. And I didn't notice that I didn't even think about the fact that this would count toward big book summer, but it did. And so this was my nonfiction pick for the second quarter that you all chose for me. And I was able happily to finish it. I just kind of dove in and only this for several days. But this is the definitive inside story of the epic hit series, The Big Bang Theory by Jessica Radloff, who actually wrote for another magazine for a very, very long time. And so I was, Glamour is where she was, but she also wrote for AOL, Huffington Post, and some other things. And she's a member of the Screen Actors Guild and other things as well. But really, Jessica Radloff did not necessarily do a whole lot of, of writing for this book. So that's what's interesting. What she did essentially is to transcribe interviews with all of the cast of this show. And in the 7 seasons that this show was on, there were a number of people that came and went, and some that were guests. And I enjoyed those as well, trying to see kind of how that happened. This was produced by Chuck Lorre. And there are a number of other perspectives from Chuck, as well as the other people that both were directors, were supportive players in the production, executive producers, showrunners, editors, casting director. There was even a woman who did the clothing, and she talks about what made her choose this or that for that particular episode or that particular character. So what it does is it gives you the perspective of each one of the characters of this show. If you haven't watched the show, this is a very intellectual but hilarious series that again went on for 7 seasons, which was not expected when they first began, because they had trouble. They had to reshoot a pilot because the first pilot just wasn't going to fly. And so it really had some great actors: Jim Parsons, Johnny Galecki, the girl whose name I can't, Mayim Bialik, which I could remember her name, but what's the girl's name with the blonde hair? I'm going to tell you. Kaylee Kuko, Kunal Nar, and Melissa Rauch and Kevin Sussman and Simon Helberg. Those are kind of the main characters that stick with it for most of the time. They did add Mayim and Melissa in later, and Stuart, the man who played Stuart, the last one I just said his name, he was kind of hit and miss. He came in later and he kind of came and went at times, but he became more prevalent as the seasons went on. What I enjoyed about this was their stories about their experience. I will say, though, that it was at times a little slow. It just kind of was like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And so there was a bit of a lull in between, which is why I was struggling to get it read, and I was last minute binging it because I had set it aside for a bit. It just wasn't calling me to come back. But that doesn't mean I didn't like it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. I think what would have been different for me too is that you got the perspective of each of them, some more in certain situations than others. So you got their perspective and then the perspective of their colleagues as well, and then the perspective of the other, the directors and producers and all that stuff. But at times it was like, oh, okay, I don't know that I really needed to know that, but I'm sure that they really felt like that was important. It really is about people who really liked each other, even at difficult times where things were done that they weren't thinking would happen. They all sort of rallied around it and supported each other and still stay connected to this day. One of them dated another one of them for a while, which I think is public knowledge, but that also was a surprise to me that that didn't like sort of impact their relationship or the cast or anything like that, which was nice to know. They did go through a writer's strike, which of course at that time was difficult for everybody. But this changed a lot of their lives forever because this was a phenomenally loved series and still is. We actually have DVDs of several of these seasons that because we liked it so much we wanted to watch and rewatch. We never watch DVDs anymore. We have so many. One day I'll maybe send you a picture, maybe I could put it in here of how many we have. It's ridiculous, but nevertheless, it talks about their connection to each other, how they got to know each other, how they were supported. It talks about their negotiations for salaries, and it also talks about some of the philanthropic work that they did and some of the things that they really cared about and tried to support, and at that time. I really loved it. I loved the series so much. And one of the reasons I loved it was because it stayed consistent all the way through in terms of the character development. Nobody ever did anything that surprised me, but it also wasn't that I wasn't delighted by it. I really was. The ending of this series, you know how sometimes you watch a series and you're like, that's how you ended up finishing it. You know what I mean. There's several of them. I'm not going to call them out because that's just, not necessary. But there were a few times we were just like, okay, I'm going to say it. It's Seinfeld. But I I was so happy and I cried so hard when this show ended. Like I really, really did. But I was so happy with the way they wrapped this up. And I would say that that to me is what will always make this high in a rating because this really did describe the experience I was having throughout and also gave me some behind the scenes information that didn't ever like upset me, which sometimes happens to me when I read or listen to books about actors and about shows, right? Like sometimes you find out things about people and you're like, I don't know that I needed to know that. None of that happened for me in this case. And so I thank you all who voted for choosing it. If you haven't voted on quarter 3, it will be closing in a little less than a week from today when I'm posting this. Go ahead and choose the one that you would like me to read for third quarter. There's 3 great ones up there, so you'll find that video if you just search through the other videos that I've posted. But it came out at the beginning of July because I was a little behind. I love that you pick my nonfiction reads though, because it takes so much pressure off of me to just be able to say, oh yeah, I'm going to read this one. Because I got to tell you, I make a lot of pressure happen when I decide what to read or what to read in the stack that I've created for myself. So yeah, it just is ridiculous. But Thank you so much for watching this video today and for sticking with me. Thank you so much for your comments, your support, also voting for the nonfiction reads that I have been thrilled to read. I have really enjoyed almost every one of them very, very much. Let me know what you read in the month of June. If you've read any of these, let me know that too. Let me know which ones you might want to read next. You know the drill. Just let me know all the things. And as always, happy reading. Bye.